Everybody, welcome back to Final Resonance TV and episode number 63 of Van Halen Stories. Got a great special guest for you today. We do these special presentations occasionally, and this is a really cool one for Backstage Auctions. My friend Jacques, who runs Backstage Auctions, has an auction going on right now with Zeke Clark, the former Eddie Van Halen guitar tech from around 85, 86 to 93, I think it was. Mm-hmm. And then Zeke went on to work with Prince, and there's some amazing stuff in your auction from Prince and Eddie Van Halen, obviously. And you said your Nick is the other person that we're going to talk about Nick too. Nick, is it Andrea?
Nick D'Andrea. Yeah.
Okay. There's another bunch of memorabilia that he had. He's a super fan that you told me about with 400 shows under his belt. Yep. Got close with Van Halen, and then through that period of working and being around Van Halen, they gave him all kinds of things, and he has all this memorabilia that he's letting go in this auction as well. So I'm going to show everybody your site so that they know about it and look it up. Let's bring it up here. I brought up here. This is Nick's drill.
Yeah. The Franken drill.
For Franken drill, right? I mean, this is this is what the first thing that got my attention was the Franken drill,
right?
And all this stuff that Nick has. I mean, he's got a guitar that's a really multi-sign guitar. That's actually let's go this way. We'll go back this way. There it is.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that too. You know, it's one of those things like we were talking about offline, discovery, right? So when I go on your site and I see these amazing pieces like this one, and then I see this crazy one, which I saw this, this actual this blow up thing that Dave.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I love this. These are amazing. So talk about Nick and about his story, and then we'll get into Zeke too.
Yeah, sure. And by the way, thanks for having me on your show.
Well, thanks for being on, man.
Yeah, no, I love this stuff. So yeah, Nick is a super awesome dude. He early 80s, he went to his first Van Halen concert and enjoyed the show, and after the show decided to go around the building, hang out backstage, and do what everyone else does, hope you get lucky, and he did. The guys came out at one point and he had some stuff with him and got it all signed, and again, just go home, you're happy kind of thing. But this being in New York, and Van Halen playing multiple shows around that time in the area, he decided the next day to go to another Van Halen show. And he did the same thing. And he met him again. And they already recognized him from the night before. And they were like, hey, buddy, you're there again. And then maybe a week later, he went to his third show. And he does the same thing. And now they know him by name. And they're making jokes and making fun, etc. Well, anyway, this went on for a couple years, where he would go to every imaginable Van Halen show, and he would always wait for them after the show backstage. And as I said, they started to know him, and know his name, and probably think of him as a super fan or a mascot or what have you. And that ultimately led, to the band saying hey, why don't you come hang out with us? We'll give you a backstage pass, and enjoy the show from a different, angle, a different viewpoint. And so he got his first pass, and he was happy as a lark, and like we all would be. Sure. And that went on actually for a while too, till he really got to the point where they would call him, and maybe not the band directly, but it was management, and say, hey, the band is going on tour. We are going to mail you, your photo ID, all access pass. You are welcome to any show, anytime, anywhere. And so fast forward from that point all the way to the final tour in 2015, Nick has been to 438 Van Halen shows over that time, which again is mind blowing. But he got along so well with everyone in the band, and they liked being around him obviously too, that over time they just started giving him stuff. you
Right.
know, and anything from, hey, dude, you know, it probably started off with, here's a pair of drumsticks, or here's a couple guitar picks, or here's this or that. But then it led to, hey, here's a guitar, or uh, David gave him, you know, one of his acoustic guitars, and then there was clothing, and Michael gave him stuff, and then when David left and Sammy came, Sammy started giving him stuff. Alex even gave him a kit, you know, that he really didn't use all that much. Obviously, it wasn't like a big stage kit, but it was actually a kit used in a video, you know, so there's some good provenance to that as well. He eventually got his name on the RIAA list. So every time Van Halen got a record award, he got one. um, you know, they gave him promo stuff, and I mean, you can think of it, and he's got it. You know, and so there's the drill. You know,
Right.
for
Right.
just one of those things. Like, hey man, do you want it? Well, of course I want it. You know,
Right.
and so. Last year, Al reached out to us, um, and this is, of course, on the heels of us doing the auction for Alex Van Halen. And he said, "Listen, I got a buddy in New York. He recently retired, and you know he wants to move. He wants to get out of the New York area. It's too expensive." And he could definitely use a little bit of extra money. And he called me and he said, "Hey, Al, I got all this stuff, but I'm reluctant about selling it. But I could use the money." So Al said, Are you crazy? Sell all this stuff." He said, "I did it. And if it's good enough for me, it's good enough for you." He said, "So you got my blessing, sell it." And so I helped sell one thing for Nick last year privately. But then, you know, after that, Nick said, "Listen, I got so much more stuff, you know, how about taking everything?" I said, "Well, I'm happy to do that, but I really think we should do that in an auction format." And so that's how we got to Nick. And also this is how Nick got his stuff. So it's he got the blessing, you know, from Al, which was really important to him, because he as I said, he kind of felt reluctant simply on account of, listen, I've been a friend with these guys for like 40 years. They've been extremely generous. They've always treated me very nicely. One of the guitars, and I'm not sure which one, but I know that there's one guitar that Eddie even signed for him when he attended his 400th show, you know, kind of like a milestone thing. And but you know, there comes a time that, you know, we all get older, we got to move on in life,
Right.
and so it was, and of course he's definitely keeping a couple things that are near and dear and personal. It's not like he's getting rid of everything.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
but yeah, so this is again, Nick's not a, you know, not didn't work for the band, but after 438 shows, you're pretty much family.
That's an amazing story, man. The whole and all the amazing things that are on your site for that. I mean, it's everybody needs to go check out that all those listings because you know Zeke's auction and that's concurrent,
Hmm.
and so there's this incredible collection of Zeke's as well that we want to talk about. Let's look at what some of this stuff on Zeke's stuff and see what we can look up here. I got some bookmarks. So Zeke Clark was his tech for a long time. A lot of us know this that are huge fans, and
Yeah,
you know there's all kinds of stuff. Zeke, tell the story about Zeke.
yeah. So Zeke Zeke is he's a giant, and even literally because he's like almost 6'4", and he easily towers over people. But he just an incredibly gifted and talented musician in his own right, but also very technical. He knows how to take anything apart and put it back together, so to speak. And whether that's a guitar or an amp or a cabinet, he can do it all. He started, and it's kind of fascinating, and I think few people know this, but he started in the mid 70s getting a gig for Bill Graham.
Right.
And Bill assigned him to be a crew guy for the Grateful Dead. And that's really where his career started, you know, messing with the guitars for Jerry Garcia, etc.
Right.
And then in 1978, Bill Graham pulled him off that gig. And Bill Graham had just contracted Led Zeppelin for their U.S. tours.
Wow.
And so for the next 3 years, he was Jimmy Page's guy.
Wow.
And I know, right? I mean, again, you talk about going from one to another. And so, of course, in 1980, you know, Bonham dies, so the band disbands, and Zeke is now, you know, going from one artist to the next, different artist, some a little bit bigger than others. But around 85, actually, according to him, started at 84, but officially he joined Van Halen in 85. He was still there when Null Monk was on his way out.
Right. Right.
And and when the change also came, you know, from David to Sammy, but he was still there when it was the, or let's say, original four with Noel, and so he was right there on that cusp.
Right.
And then indeed he spent like the next, you know, 9 years essentially just being joined to Eddie's hip.
Right.
Worked on all of his gear, guitars, amps, cabinets, pickups. I mean, you name it. He tinkered with everything, and Ed being the ultimate tinkerer himself, you know,
Right.
that was of course a match made in heaven. And so, like for instance, right there, you know, to start with some of that stuff, the
Right.
amps and cabinets. So what they would do is when they would be on the road, you know, Ed would always say, "Hey Zeke, you know, if you got time, go hit up some of those, you know, music shops and see if you can find, you know, old Marshall amps, you know, the pretty much the 1970s era amps."
Right.
And so Zeke would go to these stores looking for, you know, used amps, buy them, bring them back, and then once they were off the road, Jose Arredondo would come in, who of course was, you know, the lead engineer at Marshall, also, you know, assigned to Eddie. And then so now you got these three guys, you know, these nerds essentially, you know,
Right.
taking all this stuff apart and tinkering with it and tinkering and tinkering, and you know, till the amp sounded the way Eddie wanted the amp to sound. And but it was all different, you know. It was like, well, this is an amp that I want to have on tour. This is an amp that I want to have on the studio, or this is an amp that I only want to use for, you know, the recording of this song or that song. And you know, because again, Ed could hear things that no other human beings could like pick up. And so quite a bit of that gear, you know, stayed with Zeke, and this is, you know, what you see there. You know, these amps are and cabinets are all from, you know, the 80s era. You know, 5150 studio was in full use, so it was all sitting there. It was all being used, whether it was again just for practice, for recordings, for whatever. Yeah, it's magnificent, you know. I mean, there's all the stories, of course, about the Brown sound, and you know, and well, that's the gear that created that, you know. And so I think that that's pretty exciting. There's two guitars there that you see.
Hmm.
Those were put together and built by Zeke, you know, for Eddie. And again, you got to envision there just to be, an avalanche of bodies and necks and just loose parts. And again, it's the whole Frankenstein idea of you just put it all together and it either works or it doesn't, kind of thing. And those two guitars were definitely and extensively used by Eddie in the studio. They were never taken out on the road. What Zeke doesn't remember is if those guitars were used on recordings. Most likely they were. But again, there's, you cannot just fill in blanks. I mean, you either know or you don't. And even if you know, then I always say, do you have proof?
Right, of course.
And so, but it's, I mean, they're they have so much wear and tear on them, and the usual cigarette burns and in the headstock and all that good stuff. And I mean, it's fantastic, that those pieces survived and that he hung on to them. And,
I was going to tell you that, my friend Johnny Bean, who has a channel as well, Johnny and I are good friends, and Zeke's been doing some, talking with Johnny on there about these guitars. And he was saying that they were like, these were ones that Eddie made him build to kind of get Ed's approval of his skills. And then he had these as sort of backups as well. And so if you haven't seen Zeke on Johnny's channel, go over there and check out Johnny Bean and watch Zeke talk about all this stuff too in detail.
Yeah. Great.
He gets into the whole thing. I mean, he's so funny. I just thought he was he's such a funny guy, and he's so funny about all these items. And the Prince stories are hilarious between Eddie and Prince. I didn't know any of those stories, about Eddie and Prince. So
oh yeah,
that's pretty crazy.
And and of course, I mean, you don't have to tell this to Prince fans, but Prince is an incredible guitar player.
Oh yeah,
and it's not what most people think of when they think of Prince, but that was of course the attraction, for both Zeke and Prince, and for all the years that he spent, as I said, being joined to Eddie's hip and literally, living at 5150,
right.
And that was kind of like his home. That home was replaced, when he went to Minnesota, and basically moved in with Prince, and he recorded 5 albums with Prince, and so yeah, it's amazing. And so I think above and beyond some of the big pieces, like the amps, the cabinets, the guitars, there is a lot of like just random stuff, but it's fun stuff. Like there's so many of Eddie's guitar picks, and and some really rare ones. Anything from misprints to the unique ones that with the printing on the back, there's some picks that were even issued, to crew members. There's personal gifts, watches, that were given to him.
Yeah, right there, that tag Hewer, and you had the Submariner up here too. That really awesome one with the engraving on the back of that Rolex.
I mean, who has a Rolex with a engraved Van Halen logo, or like that gold ring that's just custom design, Van Halen gold ring. And so yeah, there's personal things. There's these, obscure crew shirts and jackets and passes. Actually, if you scroll back up a little bit, the funny story there too. Keep scrolling up a little bit. Yeah, there. Lot number 131.
Yeah.
So we're going through everything, and we're looking at this pass, and we looked the front, the back, and it didn't. Let's say it didn't really click at first, and then we were like, well, hold on here. Why would Zeke have a 1981 pass?
Right.
because obviously he wasn't employed by the band in 1981. And then we thought, like, well, maybe the pass was in a guitar case, and you know how that goes. I mean, there's stuff all over the place. So,
Right.
so I'm looking at this pass, and I'm looking at the back, and I'm like, Bickus Dickus.
Right.
And number 2. And I'm like, number 2, Bickus Dickus. And I'm like, I've seen that before. And it literally took me about 5 or 10 minutes, because I sat there just going through everything that I've ever seen in the past. And then all of a sudden it came to me. So back in, God, I don't even remember, 2019 or 2018, we did the auction for Null Monk.
Right.
And Null saved every single piece of paper, including all of his personal itineraries.
Right.
And I remember that the band started traveling under an alias.
Right.
And I'm like, oh, you know what? Let me go through all these photos from these itineraries. And lo and behold, there it was, 1981, Bickus Dickus number 2. And now Eddie was always number 2 from day one. So L was always number 1. Uh-huh. Eddie was number 2, Dave was number 3, and Michael was number 4. And so their luggage tags were 1, 2, 3, and 4. Their rooming list were 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so Bickus Dickus that's a character from a 1979 Monty Python movie, The Holy And I can only imagine that Eddie must have seen the movie, loved it, thought the name Bickus Dickus was fun. Honestly, that blurry photo, I don't even know or want to know what that is.
Right.
But the cool thing is that that is guaranteed Eddie's pass from the 1981 tour.
That's so cool.
I know, right? And again, it's these little things, that's actually a scan from the rooming list, from Noel's auction, where you see the name and the number.
Mm-hmm. There it is.
And again, I just love it, when the universes align and you figure this stuff out, because it's easy to overlook and go like, hey, here's a Van Halen pass. Well, it's not just a pass, it's a very special pass.
Well, yeah, that tour, that was the reason I got into Van Halen. I saw those videos from the 81 tour, and that's what got me going, man. I mean, and another thing that I saw in here was a really, for me anyway, was the, like you said, there's things that are not super expensive that you can get, like these passes from the Monsters of Rock tour. I was at the Monsters of Rock in 87, 80, whatever year, the 88.
Yeah.
At Memphis and Liberty Bowl. And so, these passes, it's such a thing for me from a memory standpoint, that these are the kind of things that people would love to get, and they're not so expensive. Everybody can get something,
Yeah. Well, and I'm happy you say it in those words, because that's really something that we try to do, is that I always like to do auctions where you can buy something for $50 or you can buy something for $50,000.
Right.
And I understand it's a simple pyramid. The higher the amount, the fewer people, there are that can afford that, and I get that, but sure. I never wanted to do auctions with just only high-end stuff, where when people go and they look at it and go like, oh my God, this is crazy, but I will never be able to afford anything, and and I think that by purposely putting things in there for $50 or $75 or $100, most people could still walk away, saying, hey, I got something from Zeke, or I got something from Nick D'Andrea. And so but yeah, you're right. There's definitely a lot of things that are what I think is affordable. Now, what I don't know is today's only Thursday, and the auction
Right.
ends next week Sunday.
Right.
It's entirely feasible that at some point, this stuff is going to pick up some momentum. And
Sure.
the typical auction behavior is that I always say, the first 16 days of the auction, people put some bits in, but it doesn't really mean all that much. It always comes down to the final day, and that's when you see all the 90% of the bidding happens on the last day.
Yeah. Actually, I had some of those passes that Al, when he had some passes from New York and I think L.A. that he got rid of. I got a couple of those,
Mm-hmm.
and I just wanted something, that I didn't need anything huge. I just wanted something that was directly from Al,
Mm-hmm.
I just thought that was really cool that, it's a once in a lifetime opportunity to grab something from his personal collection. And no matter how small it is, it's something like I went to his house and he said, "Hey, you want this out of my garage?" Yeah, I do. Everybody gets a shot at that. That's cool though.
Yeah.
I think that's really cool, And I remember when
Yeah.
you did the Null Monk and the Owl, both of those had such unique items. Al's had all these like these books and stuff from their childhood, all these really cool documents, that I or the piano,
Yeah.
that was an amazing piece that they had. And so
Yeah.
the stuff that you get is so amazing, and that they, it's like you said, once we get to a certain point in life, we got so much stuff. It's like we can hardly fit it in our house anyway.
Right.
And it's just like, what are you going to do with it? And then people that are out there like us, fans, would love to have something,
Mm-hmm.
And I even thought about that piano. I was like, oh, I love to have the piano, because it's just such a
Yeah.
iconic piece for their home,
Yeah.
Such a,
Yeah.
and I've
Well,
been,
especially considering that piano literally went on the boat, from the Netherlands to New York. And I mean, they probably had 2 suitcases each with stuff and that damn piano because, came hell or high water, music had to stay within the household, so to speak. And I think that's fantastic, and I mean, the piano is more than the piano,
oh, right.
and
Absolutely.
yes, it's the instrument that Al and Ed, learned music on, so to speak. But just the fact that, that, as I said, they thought that was probably more important than furniture,
Sure.
and I it makes me think, of like the 1800s, when you saw, this mass exodus or from out of Europe, into the United States, and people just settlers, just going across the country, and there was always a guy with a piano. They would, and to me, you fast forward to what was it, 1962, I believe, that they came over.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, it's different. It's no longer horse and buggy.
Right.
But it's a big steamship and everything. But there's still the piano, and so but you're right. I mean, that, Al's auction was very special. Obviously, we had 17 drum kits, we had 40 snare drums, we had gongs, road cases. I mean, his throne, or we had like 4 of them. Whatever you can think of was there. It was all there. It was crazy. But the same with Noel. Noel. Noel's story is fantastic too.
Bill Graham as well, right?
Yeah.
Right.
It's the same as Zeke. So Noel actually started at the Fillmore East in New York.
Mm.
And he was the stage manager. And he would literally just every time, it didn't matter, whatever band would come in that week, and usually it was a couple different bands, he would just grab a sheet of paper and by hand just, draw out what piece of gear belongs to whom and where it has to go on stage.
Right.
And so that was his little stage plot, nothing technical, scientific, just by hand, and I actually like he saved them, and we had his hand drawn plots for Janis Joplin and Led Zeppelin and Jimi Hendrix and the Grateful Dead and what have you, and but then after the experience of having worked at the Fillmore East for a couple of years, he too just took to the road and started working with various artists. He went to Europe with Johnny Cash. He did a U.S. tour with Bonnie Raitt, like her first U.S. tour. His big breakthrough, though, came at the end of 1977. So he was already working with Warner Brother artists.
Right.
And Warner called him at the end of 77 and said, hey, we have this very raucous British punk band coming to the United States.
Right.
And they're out of control, and we need a guy who can, rule with an iron fist. And if you knew Null, Null was very attracted to, I won't say violence, but he
was a tough guy. He was a tough guy. I remember
he liked to rumble, and I mean, when I went to his house, I'd actually been to his house a couple times. He had this massive safe, and every imaginable weapon you can think of was in that safe, and Van Halen fans probably will know the stories about the crew, how physical the crew was.
Yeah.
And they would, beat up bootleggers in the parking lot.
Yeah,
they would have zero tolerance for rowdy behavior, in the audience. And but Noel specifically recruited physical guys,
right, right.
I mean, he had a gang,
right.
And but anyway, so he kind of already had that reputation a little bit with Warner, and then so they hooked him up with the Sex Pistols, and that, of course, became pretty legendary, this whole American Sex Pistols tour. And he was all but done with that tour when he got the call, like, okay, so we got these guys, they're pretty boys from LA, they've never been outside of California, but their band is really, really good, and they're going to be huge, but we need a father figure. And so that's when he actually met. He met with them.
Yeah.
And the story of him meeting Van Halen is hilarious.
I have heard that. It's in his book.
Yeah. The car broke down, and they had to run like 3 miles, and they arrived and all dirty and sweaty, and and Noel's giving him a hard time, for being late, not saying, oh my God, you guys are, you persisted, you ran for 3 miles, that shows dedication. He immediately, laid into them and gave them a hard time.
Right.
But, but yeah, I mean, his collection was insane as well, and just so many, unique documents, and I mean, his itineraries where he detailed literally every single day, not so much where they played, but literally from the hotel, they stayed at to the restaurant where they ate, and the method of transportation. And I mean, if you, and there's actually, I won't mention his name, but there's actually a huge Van Halen fan who I knew bought all those itineraries, and I tell you, this person could easily, do like, let's say a 1978 book, a day-to-day book, and I mean, it's amazing. But yeah, it's, working with Noel was fascinating. for a lot of reasons.
Right. Right. Yeah, he sent me actually when I was talking to him on a regular basis. He sent me one of the Sex Pistols passes, backstage
Oh,
passes, and
yeah,
his book with the Sex Pistols book. He sent me that too. So he sent me
nice.
a couple of things. Yeah, we had a lot like late night conversations.
Oh yeah.
He would tell
You
me
know,
stories.
I will say this though. I am really happy that Noel got to do this in the end.
Yeah.
Because um, he didn't have the easiest childhood, so to speak.
Mhm.
And then all of a sudden, he has this amazing, like, almost 20 years that are almost surreal,
Mhm.
from, well, that's not quite 20 years, but let's say from 1969 all the way through like 1986.
Right.
So he had 17 years where, you live out of your suitcase and you're in this bizarre orbit, with over the top things happening constantly. And, you know, once that chapter closed for him, um, and he made a couple attempts, to pick it up,
Mhm.
but rarely, do you find lightning in a bottle twice.
Right. Right. Right.
And he was assigned to this band called Prophet.
I've heard of that.
Yeah, I think they too were a Warner, and they put a lot of money in these guys, and they actually their album's really good,
Right.
but it just didn't go anywhere. Wrong time, wrong place, so to
Sure.
speak.
Sure.
And Noel really really struggled, with the afterlife, so to speak, and it's because again you come off that 17-year high and then nothing,
Right. Right.
and it reminded me a little bit, of Bill Coyne.
Right. Right.
Here's a guy who, by chance meets these four clowns, and then boom, all of a sudden, you're managing one of the biggest bands in the world,
Right.
and then you split, and yeah, he Bill had one more kind of like little peak after that with Billy Idol for a couple years, but then it was over,
Right.
and that's hard,
Yeah.
that's really hard, so for Noel, doing the two books, the Sex Pistols book and the Van Halen book, I think was if anything very therapeutic,
Yeah.
and I think that once he had done those books, there was really no need for him to hang on to this stuff,
Right.
because he kept it as a reminder, and he used it, for dates and places and what have you.
Right.
And I think doing that auction was kind of like the last time he was in the spotlight,
Right.
and
Right.
and that's a place that he was comfortable in,
Right.
and that's, I think, a spot that he also craved and missed,
Right. Right.
and I was really happy, and it's and that's kind of, by the way, I think a lot of times what happens with these auctions is, even though they're just little, blips in time, but even with a guy like Zeke, that now Zeke's career is a little different. I mean, this is a guy that has been doing this for 40 years, and I mentioned the Grateful Dead and Led Zeppelin, but he also. And of course, there's Van Halen and Prince, but he's worked with Def Leppard, and he's worked with Poison, and he's worked with the last years in his career with a bunch of big time country artists, and I mean, he's worked with so many people. It's amazing. But several years ago, he too retired from that, and again, then all of a sudden, it's that radio silence, and it's very hard to step off that train,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I
Because
think
we never get into this to think about retiring, right? Yeah. I mean,
no,
I mean, none of these guys. I mean, I'm just like me. It's like this is what you love to do. So,
yeah,
You know, it's not like something you're planning on retiring from.
No, 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 no. You just, yeah, yeah, and I hear you, and I think that's why, you just, you're on that train, for either as long as you want to be on that train or for as long as you can afford to stay on the train, because it's tough, it's hard, and, but that's why I think you see a lot of these legacy acts, bands that started in the 70s and 80s, sometimes even 60s, they're still out there and they got nothing to prove. And 9 out of 10 times, it's not even about the money, but it's what else are they going to do? This is all they know. And, being on stage and seeing all these people in front of you, that's their fuel, and it's hard to be away from that. I was just watching, the Bon Jovi video from Madison Square Garden, and
Yeah. Yeah.
interesting little story here, but he was doing a private warm up gig
Mhm.
in Baltimore, and I was fortunate enough to be invited to that.
Mhm.
And just a few hundred people, and he sounded insane. He sounded so great, and I mean the whole show was from front to back was tight, and it was absolutely fantastic, And then you watch a video, from like a few weeks later, and he's struggling, and his voice is giving out, and and that's and so you start thinking about that train, and as I said earlier, at some point you got to get off, and but you don't want to because it's all and
Right, right.
it's hard,
That's
it's
what's
hard.
yeah. He's been a hard worker his whole life.
Yeah.
You have to admire how steadfast he has been about his career and how even through the hard stuff he's pushed through and he's
Yeah.
no matter what happens he keeps going. And like you
Yeah.
said, it's a heck of a train to ride, but he's been riding it for a long time. I mean, it's
Hmm.
it's
Absolutely.
it's insane.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is. It is, and so for a guy like Zeke, who quite literally started 50 years ago, just basically being a kid, and still being in his teens, and so yeah, it's there's more behind it than just stuff,
Right.
and so again, when you do an auction, it's great because to me, it's like you're celebrating somebody's career. You're celebrating their achievements. You're celebrating their legacy, and these little mementos or big mementos, are all part of that story, and that's why, I enjoy doing this so much, because you get that opportunity to, tell the story and also you preserve the story, and which I think is so important. And again, that's, I love, what we do at Backstage, and been doing it for almost 25 years, is by working with musicians and people from the industry, techs and managers and producers and promoters and what have you. You really do more than sell stuff, and
Sure.
I know, of course, that's a big part of it, or people will say it's the biggest part of it, and I can't deny that. But I always like to think that, yes, but hold on here. You get to preserve little bits of history, and you get to, if there's a story, then we make sure the story is told, and then whoever buys that knows that story, and they will preserve that story. And then 10, 20, 30 years from now, when they pass it on to a next generation, that story is still alive,
Right.
and I think that that's important, and people like Zeke, are just as important than people like Eddie Van Halen,
Sure.
and so yes, I think that an auction is more than just selling stuff,
Yeah,
and
well, that's like you said, the stories that you keep moving forward. With Noel's stuff and with
yeah,
Alex's stuff. The piano, for instance, we were
yeah,
talking about. That's a story that they have kind of touched on when they were over the years. They would mention it, but to know real history behind that. I don't know if you know, I go out and do these. I do these sort of things where I go out to LA and I go to the Pasadena area and I go to all the historical sites. Every place I know that Van Halen was either played at or the home that they immigrated to that
Yeah,
that they brought
yeah,
the piano to. It was a three duplex place,
hmm
and so I go there and I also kind of capture the history of their lives in the places that they were. What I mean?
yeah,
So
yeah.
that's just a cool thing to be able to leave for some people behind. It's a
Mhm.
passion. Van Halen was always a passion of mine. So it's like I'm able to share the stories, the lesser known histories of these things, so that
Mhm.
some kid is going to get on and go. He gets interested in Van Halen and he wants to know the stuff I wanted to know.
Yeah, yeah. Well, to that fact, and I love this, and I love that you do it
Yeah.
because I think it's important. Good friend of mine from Germany, he was actually doing a little, trip through Europe, and he drove through the Netherlands,
Yes.
and he decided to go to the apartment complex where they were born.
Yep.
And so he took pictures of the outside building, and then he managed to get in the door, and he took picture of where the mailboxes are, and then he walked up there and he took picture of the front door, and stuff like that. And there's literally nothing that tells you that those two guys were born behind and grew up as little kids behind that door.
Right.
And and but I find it exciting and fun, and that there's people like him, who just want to go there and see it, just touch it, touch that door, touch that doorknob, and I get it. I totally get it, and there's a lot of different ways, to preserve history, but it is important. I really think it is important,
Yeah.
and I'm glad you're doing it, through your show, and your interviews, and I would like to think that we contribute to, through
Absolutely.
what we do, so.
Absolutely. As you document each item, you give a description of how it came to
Mhm.
be and all those things. And
Yeah.
that's the history. Like you said, it moves on with the next person and those stories keep moving forward. And, and all of our lives, we all got to come to this point where we don't need everything we accumulated. Right. So like in your, talked about, it's just sometimes it's time, to do it. But I really appreciate you coming on today, Jocks. It's really cool to meet you and have our opportunity to hang out with you. And I hope you do great on this auction and Zeke's
Mhm.
stuff gets moved on to the next generation of folks. And
Mhm.
anything you need in the future, if you have something else you want to talk about, you hit me up. We'll definitely do that.
I much appreciate it, Jeff, and I'm sure we'll have some future, Van Halen consigners with interesting backgrounds and histories and stories. So I will certainly, make use of that. And again, thanks for having me on the show. Thanks for
Absolutely.
letting me talk about Nick D'Andrea and Zeke Clark. And I too, hope that they do well, and that all their little bits of history are going to find a new home. I'm sure it will. So thanks again.
Absolutely, man. You have a great day, and I appreciate it. And we'll talk soon. All right.
You bet. Thanks,
Thank you.
Jeff. Take
All
care.
right, buddy. Thank
Bye.
you. Bye bye.